Hi, everyone. Welcome to TRG 30 September, our first episode in September. It's unbelievable that we're here already. I am looking forward to the fall. I suspect you are too. TRG 30, where we talk about the 7 bold new ways and advance those discussions and others that help us imagine, act on, and create resilient future for our sector. Today, we're going to build on last week's content. Today is Whys and Pies Part 2. We're going to be talking about business model management as we move forward and through this pandemic time. Today, we'll talk about how new revenue streams and a vision of them want to consider the expense side and the operational side, the new business model in its entirety, and how to adapt for a resilient future. Here's what I want you to be listening for. First, just cause. We discussed this last week. It's a big discussion for a big resilient future. And if you haven't gotten all the way or even started imagining your just cause, you do need to be listening now to how close your current or pre-COVID business model is to future possibilities. I'll be describing some today. Listen for how this example might apply to you. And with that in mind, then, you can begin to think about the adaptations that you can make now so that you can be resilient and get to that future that you might be starting to imagine. And this is going to require new models, new ways, new income streams and investment areas, to be sure, but also we're going to need to develop new muscles for listening, new processes, new types of work. I'll be showing and talking about examples of that. Again, listen for how that might relate to your organization and you. So let's begin. Remember, last week we talked about aligning a revenue budget with your just cause. That thing you imagine, you aspire to become that may always be just out of reach. And today it may be harder than ever to imagine getting close to this just cause. In fact, you might be wondering how on earth I could be asking you to think about this aspirational future with a capital F when the pandemic has made all of everything financially and operationally so tough. But I remember you. A couple of weeks ago, a full 95% of you said your organization could make it through at least a year, if not further. So yes, it is time. It's time to plan and push and to think hard about where we're going, how our past informs our future, and how we might want that future to be different. If where you want to go is different than where you've been, then to follow the metaphor, you likely need a new pie. Today, we're going to take an example from last week and push it and that work further. We're going to talk staffing structures and expense allocations, new ways of working, new muscles to stretch as it relates to this aspirational future identity. Okay, so remember this guy, this organization from last week. We've broken out the revenue streams a little bit more in detail, but this organization is a producing organization. This is their pre-COVID revenue pie. They relied on 23% of income coming from contributed sources. 70% of income is earned income from patrons. We've pulled out the school, their education component, because it relates to this story and narrative today. But 70% of their income came from people, school parents, ticket buyers, and members. And 7% is from other sources. Their COVID current business model and revenue streams look like this: smaller, heavier reliance on contributed income, and proportionally, these other sources of income are playing a large role. Now, this organization has begun to imagine its just cause future. It's a big exercise. It's not yet done, but they've begun to see opportunities to take their current realities and move them directionally toward this future they're beginning to see, that's beginning to take shape. Two opportunities that are main for them. The first is this. Remember that their revenues tie directly to a large volume of patron people relationships. And in their particular market, there are demographic shifts that are not just in the future going to happen, they're happening now. So this leadership and organization has said, we have not just an opportunity, we have a service obligation to connect with different broader parts of our community, and we want to make that a priority for our resilient now. Opportunity number one. Number two is this. Local foundations in their community are beginning to invest in community education support. The school systems are strapped because local and state budgets are strapped. We know, they know, educators know that arts education is critical to student education. And so they've begun to imagine, to ask, this school that we operate, we have skills in curriculum development, in teaching at scale and on a one-on-one basis. How could we take those skills and apply them to our local community objectives? So as they began to map out the financial possibilities, this 3-year picture on the right emerged. So left-hand side is their pre-COVID revenue streams. You've seen these already. The right-hand side is their imaginings about potential revenue streams in 3 years. These things to note. There's a 15% increase in school/education income as they began to imagine and be in dialogue with not only their local school systems, but also a community college where they are ideating about how their skill set might support and reinforce local community education objectives. There's a 5% increase in foundation income. Again, not hard contracted commitments, but conversations where foundations are saying, yes, right, that's interesting. We can imagine that we might participate more deeply or in a new way to support where you're going. Same with corporate sponsorships. Their current relationships are being excited by the possibilities that they're beginning to imagine. And while difficult, they successfully grappled with what they'd have to stop doing to enable this growth. And that meant the reduction of some show productions, some productions on a proportional basis. Having said that, though, they also reinforced their commitment to better serve this ever-changing market that they operate in. And their artistic teams became actually excited and energized about the new and creative ways that they imagine testing and trying to involve local artists and specific communities in programmatic partnership. This revenue shift, obviously, they had to acknowledge and plan for would come with a shift in expenses. So their future model, as it's taking shape, looks like the model on the right. Now, the pre-COVID expense model is on the left, and it looks like what you might expect, given the large proportion of show income, ticket buyer member income. On the right, though, you see a growth in education investment. Right now, they're thinking about faculty, curriculum development, and community partnership development. If we're going to expand, we're going to need staff and resources to develop those relationships. The production and artistic team reduced proportional to the reduction in performance and shows, but they're also excited about acknowledging they're going to need different skills and talents as they do this kind of work that builds on the COVID digital distribution that they're testing. As they imagine their skills being used in education, it is spicing and sparking the imagination of the production and artistic teams. More on that soon. Marketing, same proportion, even though there's fewer events. They're planning to spend and invest in listening, becoming part of the communities that they want to serve for the long term, and then spending to invite, and inviting and acquiring new people, new audiences, new patrons is more expensive than retention. The way they're keeping the proportion the same, though, is by doubling down on the retention of their existing patrons, and that is the most cost efficient of the marketing portfolio. Finally, development expense is going to grow proportionally. The team is going to grow foundation. They believe they'll need to grow foundation income, corporate partnerships, and more. So crucially, this team grappled with this thing that we at TRG talk with the field about all the time. We must stop trying to do everything so that we can focus on the most important thing. Ironically, now we've all had to stop. COVID has created a forced stop doing. And it does, in fact, provide us time to think. And my question of you is, could you take advantage of this time to stop and think, to think before you act again? What we know and hear now is that there are second rounds, conversations now happening about staffing and resources as PPP funding and other kind of expense support systems are reducing or diminishing entirely. And we're hearing about across the board staff cuts or departmental staff cuts. And the question I want to pose to you today is, can you take the time to stop and think about your next term business model before you make those across the board cuts, thinking instead of thinking about skills and people instead of job descriptions and departments, thinking about skills and people that might help with your next step future. So I want to go there. Let's start with this premise. Now it's more important than ever to put people, the people we serve, at the center. I hope you agree with this premise, but you may not. This is part of the tension in nonprofit arts and culture. What is actually driving the results? Is it the art, the curatorial decisions, or is it the community? This is a critical point to reconcile in your planning. We believe at TRG it's a both and, not an either or. This long conversation is for another day. For right now, in this moment though, I'm going to assume that you agree that putting our community at the center is critical and more important than ever. And if you agree, you will have likely already thought about and acknowledged this. Our community responds to siloed and departmental messages all the time, has likely is now and has in the past. But there is another way where the community's at the center and we're working as an ensemble programmatically in box office patron services, in education and marketing around and on behalf of our community. If our communities, however we define them, are at the center, then you have an opportunity to integrate processes, the work itself, goals, results, around relationship to that community. What if you oriented your work, take advantage of this more nimble time, even though it's hard, and orient the work around relationship across your institution throughout silos, not just ticket buyer relationships. I think it's easier to see these stages in that context, but also with students, schools, foundations, corporations, all of it. Let's talk about it from a ticket buyer standpoint first. I think it's more intuitive there. If we're listening, in this organization that I've advanced, they are not only listening to their current patrons because they want to double down on relationship there. That requires marketing and communication, surveys, box office, patron services. But if they are listening to be part of new communities, in authentic and sustained ways. Whom does that require? That is leadership. That is people who have those kinds of listening and ease with others skills. Everyone, it certainly isn't just silos. Listening is a new muscle that as a field we must develop and make a critical part of our ongoing operations and functions. Past the listening is invitation, and this feels more like something we're familiar with. This is communication. It's email, direct mail, digital, maybe tele. Invitation and inviting participation. Retention is box office and patron services, to be sure, marketing and development, and the long-term loyalty that looks like marriage and commitment. That is leadership. That's development skills. This arc on a ticket buyer basis might make sense to you. Now let's apply it to the education team. If we're thinking about education, what does listening look like? If we're expanding a school operation to other schools or a college, who is listening? Is that just the education department? That's leadership, perhaps board leadership. Again, people with the skills, connections, ability to sustain new relationships. If we're talking about invitation, is that not marketing? And communications, is that an education team member? Same with retention. Is that the box office, patron services, marketing, and development? How do we work together as an ensemble to invite, retain, listen, and then develop the loyalty that we need, want, that is part of the just cause that this organization is beginning to imagine? The point is to apply your skills, your people, in an integrated way across the institution on behalf of relationships, people, and skills. You're facing all kinds of people issues right now. We are hearing about it, as I mentioned before, but we are so curious about how a new framework of a business model that goes beyond post or pre and current COVID realities to a post-COVID resiliency. How does that framework help you think about your people and their skills differently? How might it enable you to see them rather than roles and departments? As you begin to think this way, you'll also begin to see new needs. The organization that I was speaking of is thinking about this. How do our artists fit into our plans? This particular organization is thinking about not only how will they engage their unionized and contracted workforce, but also gigging artists in the community that might help them see themselves and their artistic opportunities differently. Our former TRG 30 guests, Shakespeare's Globe in London, inspired this with their creative council. This organization hopes and believes that their version of this might help them connect to their community differently, authentically, to different parts of the community. And that is exciting them. And they're also thinking about this. What are the technology needs? We're experimenting, everyone is, with digital distribution, digital relationship management. What does new technology require, enable us when we resume production in the more traditional ways? What does it enable us as we think about our school operations? What does it enable us as we think about tapping and connecting with new opportunities in new communities? What they're recognizing and getting excited about is that there are creative people that have these experiences in technology that go far beyond our particular experiences in arts and cultural production. And this particular artistic team is being sparked by the imagination of hiring contractors and other project workers who might help them build new capacities. And finally, they're thinking about education, a siloed programmatic element prior to this work for sure. So you've heard evidence in my language here about how they're thinking about how education plugs into the operation and how the operation programming plugs into education. But they're also asking questions about how their education skills, resources, experiences plug into the community in ways that they can describe over the next 3 years, but ways that their just cause are causing them to imagine differently. So that's a lot. And upon evaluation of these things, you might start to consider different structures to accomplish your plans. There's a lot to test and learn here. The example that I have is a bogus one, obviously, bogus titles and people and departments, but it does suggest diversity. It suggests a less traditional hierarchy that might have management at the center rather than on top of a hierarchy. Just like we're orienting in this organization, the community at the center. Now, this might take time and iteration. Depending on your culture, one big org chart change might be the only way to create change. For some of you, iteration, testing, and learning, something we've learned from our friend Fred Reichheld of Net Promoter Score fame. Jill, he says to me, test and learn, test and learn. At TRG, we like 90-day tests. Let's try something for 90 days. Regardless of where you are on that spectrum, what we all have in different ways now is time. Let's use it to challenge our assumptions, involve teams in imagining our new resilient futures, test new ways of getting results. So here are some next steps for you. First, compare your current business model, your current pre-COVID business model, to future possibilities, even if you haven't imagined fully your just cause. What are the near-term resilient possibilities? And then map out the models, map out the revenue models, map out the expense models that you can imagine enabling your resiliency now. Focus on organizational relationships, and then map your skills and people and structures against them. And finally, take action. Don't be afraid to iterate, to test, and to learn. Remember, your posture now matters. People are craving positive, inspired leadership. Check your posture every day. Make sure you're showing up to your community in ways that meet your just cause potential vision, respect, integrity, humanity, service. These are the things that our just causes will demand. Caitlin, you've popped up on the screen. I know it's time for questions. I look forward to them.
It is. We have some excellent questions here, many of which could be sessions in and of themselves. So the challenge to you, Jill, is to let us get through as many as we can in this moment. I want to take us back to a question that Catherine offered. After seeing this organizational shift that we've proposed, she says that the rationale for change looks exciting and she gets the proportions. Well, what are we thinking about in terms of the size of budget? When can organizations re-achieve the budget that they had pre-COVID, or how would you plan for that?
Well, I think that answer is completely situational and bespoke to you. The math that I'm seeing for some organizations gets back to, in different ways, close to pre-COVID numbers in 3 years because of business model shifts. And in some others, it's taking 5. That, unfortunately, Catherine, that's an answer that has to consider your market, your patrons, your staff, your vision. That's the time we have now, and the opportunity that we have to begin to map it.
Great. Okay, we're going to go in another direction here. This is from an executive director who says they are easy at test and learn without having all the answers or process. They like living in that space, but not all of their team members do.
Yeah, sure.
And they tend to slow that nimbleness down. So how do we help them deal with this? How do we bring a team along?
Yeah, purposeful communication, over communication, over communication, over communication, and acknowledgement. I ascribe to the belief that having people around me who are different than me strengthen me. So acknowledging through simple conversations, strength finders, other things that help you surface what the strengths are of the people around you so that you can say, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's what we're testing. Here are the opportunities and the risks. And for those of us who are comfortable here, you will help us go in these directions. And for those of you who have different strengths or are less comfortable, I'm going to be leaning into you to listen to you, to ensure that I don't have blind spots and that the critical thinking is surfaced. And the last thing I'd say is, this is the time to get real. This test and learn environment is one that's going to be in front of us for some time. So having the hard conversation that says, if this environment that I believe as a leader we need to adopt isn't going to be a good fit for you, let's have a conversation about that. Because what you can't have is someone dragging the whole team down, even though you've done all these other things.
All right, so you're talking a little bit about listening there. We have other questions about listening, and you've said we have to listen to our community and listen to our patrons. We talk about NPS here, so there's certainly that path that we use to do some listening. Are there other ways you would offer to how we listen to people in active, good, regular ways?
I can give you examples. Listening is a big word, and you know how to listen because you collectively are married, you have children, you have friends, and you have neighbors. So NPS is a way. It has become a tactic, and that's a problem. The NPS system is really about adopting a position and posture that says we are going to listen, and we value that at the top, and we're going to create infrastructure to ensure it happens. So it can be a survey. It can be phone conversations. It can be, we are going to make a real and sustained effort to become part of our Hispanic community. And so we are going to create a 5-year plan that we know will be permanent, where we attend meetings, we go to coffees, we become part of that community, and in dialogue, we are listening. Listening takes all kinds of form, and it assumes action. That's the part that's often missing. So listening for action so that when we hear, we act like we've heard. We all know what it feels like to talk and then nothing changes. That's not what listening is.
Great. Okay, I'm giving you one more, and then I'll let you tell us what's coming next and close us out. Michael asks, do you think there's philanthropic or major donor support for reimagining and realigning our efforts?
Yes.
Yes, great. All right.
So
yes. Why are you so confident? You're so confident. I love it. Why will they say yes?
Well, because I'm hearing evidence of it. And that overstatement is designed to inspire you to have the conversation. When the conversation is had and donors and board members are engaged and inspired, we have to listen, we have to take feedback and criticism and not have blind spots, but they can be inspired around meeting the needs of the organization they love and the community they live in. We're seeing it over and over again. Okay, Caitlin, listen, my promise is anyone who puts their name next to a question, I will absolutely answer personally. And let's talk about what's coming up next week and beyond. This is the TRG 30 docket. Next week, live from the stage, we'll be talking to the folks at Barrington Stage, the first ones to announce a socially distanced construct for performance. We'll talk with them about how that is going. You can see the rest of our plans for the rest of the month. I encourage you to refer to friends and to sign up yourself for those upcoming episodes. And I encourage you to visit us here. We have reoriented our approach around your resiliency. And there are a variety of tools that you can be tapping for free. For one, is our COVID sector benchmark. We have 500 global organizations participating. This benchmark, in partnership with our close friends, Purple 7 in England, is designed to help us not only put our own patron relationships and activity in context, but to build the tools that will help us be resilient moving forward. In addition, we at TRG are developing custom and bespoke ways that we can support your resiliency, that can help you imagine this next term future for your organization in your communities. I want to inspire you to believe, inspire you to have the posture that says, not only will we manage through, we will thrive through. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining me today. Stephen will be back next week, and I look forward to seeing you all next week at TRG 30. Thank you.